Hello and welcome to our Campaign Catchup here on CBN News. And we're going to be bringing you up to speed on everything that's happening with the campaigns between now and Election Day. Obviously, things really heated up last week with the court trial of former President Trump. It's only going to get more chaotic from here. So we're hoping to take all of the things that we see happening, distill it down for you, and give it to you in a digestible segment here. And joining me to do that, host of CBN's DC Debrief podcast, John Stolnis, and CBN chief political analyst, David Brody. Gentlemen, how you doing?
Doing well.
Doing good, Dan.
All right, great. Well, I want to start with the Trump side of things here, because obviously, as I said, a lot of activity going on here. Let's start with the polling. Obviously, we all know about the convictions that happened. Now we've had a couple days here. Some people are trying to get their polls in. What are we seeing?
Well, John, you take it away.
Either one.
Well, I mean, I think what we're seeing is that I think CBS News had a poll out today. They asked the same people a set of questions that they asked a couple of weeks ago about whether you think the trial is fair, whether you think the president is getting a raw deal. How do you feel about the state of the Justice Department and all that? And really what we're finding is that after the guilty verdict, it's relatively unchanged. It seems as though at least the people that were spoken to in this poll were kind of baking a possible Trump guilty verdict into the cake, so to speak. And so we're not seeing a whole lot of movement. It's very partisan, obviously. Overall, I think the poll said 56% of the respondents felt that Donald Trump received a fair trial. 44% said that he did not. But of course, that's wildly different depending on whether you are a Republican or a Democratic respondent. Democrats said 96% of them that he got a fair trial. Just 4% said it was unfair. Republicans, 14% said he had a fair trial. 86% said it was unfair. And then according to independents, and this is really the number I think to really be looking at, 54% said that they believed it was a fair trial. 46% said that it was not a fair trial. So I think that's the number to be looking at with all of these different polls. And I think we're really going to get a sense even more when we start looking at battleground state numbers. And I think we have to get a little bit away from this as well. Once you move like a month away, once kind of the emotion is out of it a little bit, these numbers will start to solidify. And at the end of the day, I don't really think this is going to move the needle a whole lot in terms of whether a person's going to vote for Donald Trump in November and whether they're not going to vote for Donald Trump in November.
Yeah, super interesting. Well, I'm just going to throw in here real quick, David, and I'll let you jump in. But I mean, this is one poll. This is CBS that we're looking at here. So we'll see how some of these other polls go. But I do agree with you, John, there. That independent number is going to be super critical because my take is always that they seem to decide the election, right? You're not going to – somebody who is a Biden supporter is not going to necessarily see this and go, well, I'm flipping over. Like you said, they seem to be pretty solidly in place there. So watch that independent number, and we'll continue to do that. David, what was your reaction going to be?
Yeah, I have a bit of a different take on all of this, especially as it relates to the independents. I'll get to them in a moment. But as for the polls, it does feel a little bit like Seinfeld here, like yada, yada, yada. Like, okay, I got it. The polls are out. We'll check it another month and a half. And, this will just kind of either be all over the place or maybe it'll stay the same. Either way, we're going to, like John said, we're going to have a better idea in a few months on how all this is going to shake out. But I'll say this, that independent number, ideally, technically, in years past, in elections past, that has been the number to watch. I'm not quite sure if it's that big of a deal this time around. We are in a polarized environment. People have pretty much chosen sides. The independents in this country, they're there, clearly. We know that from a mathematical standpoint. They're there. But a lot of them are pretty much made up their mind. And the ones that haven't is a smaller swath. And ultimately, I don't know, are independents important? Okay, sure, but there's a big asterisk on this. And here's the asterisk. Not only are they smaller, but the real number to look for is enthusiasm. Ultimately, you win elections on getting your base out. And when I say the base, I don't mean the MAGA base. Look, MAGA is not going to win the election for Donald Trump. He's got to go further and deeper than MAGA. I'm talking about the Republican base versus the Democrat base. Biden has got a lot of problems inside of his base. This is the inherent problem. If you look at enthusiasm polls, and it has been consistent for the last, year or so, Biden is -20 on enthusiasm. In other words, Democrats are 20% less enthusiastic than Republicans are about Donald Trump. And so when you look at it from those terms, and it's all about getting your base out, that's going to be the key. And I think this verdict has mobilized Republicans who were, in essence, holding their nose in the air, or holding their nose, with Donald Trump. I think you're going to see a lot of them come back and actually vote for Trump, ones that might not have voted for him otherwise. I'll give you one quick anecdotal story. I was having dinner with a good friend, last night. We were having dinner. He's a Republican, mainstream Republican, a Nikki Haley type supporter. Can't stand Donald Trump. Absolutely can't stand him. Told me 3 months ago he'd never vote for Trump in a million years. Last night at dinner said, you know what? I'm voting for Trump. And I said, what? You can't stand the guy. He goes, democracy's too important. What they did he said what they did to Trump was wrong. What they did him dirty, is what he said. This is a guy that can't stand Trump. And I'm telling you, that is the sentiment. We can look at polls all you want, but there is a sentiment out there that people feel like Trump got the raw end of the deal in this. And because of that, I think that might rule the day at the end of the day.
Well, and we'll get into this appeal here in a minute, guys, but and some of the aspects of that's going on. But Trump, for his part, in talking about these polls and how people are reacting, he's saying that, because the sentencing is coming on July 11th, and he said if he's put under house arrest, he said it would be a breaking point for the American public, and he's not sure that they would stand for it. This is an interview on Fox News over the weekend that he talked about. He said, I think it'd be tough for the public to take. At a certain point, there's a breaking point. Now, David, he's rallying people here. Of course, we saw all the fundraising things. We'll get into that number in a minute, but we saw the fundraising talking about how he's wronged and he's a political prisoner and things of this nature. You think he's used to this role, and this is kind of like his sweet spot almost, being in the victim role? Explain that.
Yeah, it's his sweet spot, but let's also remember that, the cynicism portion of this, a lot of people will say, oh, he loves that role and he plays the martyr and the victim well, and it's a big act by Donald Trump, that this is just good for business, that this is kind of a PR stunt. No, it's not. See, this is the big disconnect. People think that this is Donald Trump just kind of, playing this from an electoral college standpoint, that this will just work for him. That's not it. Look, that is way too simplistic of a narrative. See, and here's why. We talked a little bit about this, Dan, the other night when the verdict came down. But the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of there. You look at the Russian collusion situation, right? That was proved to be, there was no Russian collusion. That the people within the government did spy on President Trump's campaign. That's not conspiracy. That is now proven fact. And you just go down the list. So he's been down this road before about people, quote, out to get him. He always said, they're spying on my campaign. Everybody was laughing at the time. Well, guess what? No one's laughing now. It was true. And in this case, with the Alvin Bragg situation, let's be honest, and let's all take a truth serum pill here for a second. If this was anybody other than Donald Trump, this would never have gotten to court. And if it did, it sure wouldn't be 34 felonies. So look, people are smart enough to realize that Donald Trump is being specifically targeted. And once again, that is not a Republican or a conservative or a MAGA talking point. That is an overall talking point for sure about what's been going on.
All right, well, let's get moving over to these fundraising totals now. Trump's team has come out and they have really announced some massive numbers. So tell me what these numbers were, John, and what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so in the day after the guilty verdict, Donald Trump's campaign says that they raised $35 million. And then Laura Trump on, I think it was CNN on Sunday, announced that the RNC had raised $70 million over the 2 days since the guilty verdict. So It's not surprising that certainly the base Trump supporters and as David is saying, there are, I'm sure, some people who were on the fence at the very least, and there might be some who are decidedly anti-Trump who decided, okay, now I would like to donate money to the campaign. There have been stories of people who have never donated money to a campaign who have decided now to donate money to Donald Trump's campaign, to the RNC, and obviously in presidential elections, money is a big deal. It allows you to do these big ad buys. It allows you to get your message out to a much wider audience. But I don't think Donald Trump has an issue getting his message out. And so what this, I think, is going to do is really help go towards paying for some of the legal fees that he is racking up. And Lara Trump said that, certainly some of that will happen. People who are donating have an ability to say they only want a certain percentage or so much of their donations to go towards that. But I know that's where some of this money is going to be earmarked, but it also will be earmarked towards his campaign, and that's definitely got to be a little bit worrisome for the Biden campaign. It's a double-edged sword for them for sure. Certainly, the president is going to try and get some mileage out of being able to say Donald Trump convicted felon, and we'll see whether or not that lands with the electorate. There are many Americans for whom that will land, for whom that does make a difference, and the polling bears that out. For some, it won't, and then you have to wonder, well, the enthusiasm that this may generate for Donald Trump, will that come back to bite Joe Biden with some of the voters, maybe some of the Nikki Haley voters that he has maybe been hoping to go ahead and pluck, some of the Chris Christie voters that he had been maybe wanting to go and try and pluck over to his side. An interesting story came out last week in that it didn't sound as though Joe Biden or the Biden campaign had really been reaching out to the Haley campaign or the Chris Christie campaign to try and bring these people into the fold. So there is, I think, an initial enthusiasm for donating for Trump in the days after this. But again, how long will it last? Is it sustainable? Will it continue when the next controversy comes up? Because as we know, during a presidential campaign, there is always a next controversy until you finally get to the ballot box on Election Day.
Yeah, controversy with Trump, I've never heard of such.
Hard to believe. I know.
No, but it's interesting. You bring that point of galvanizing all these kind of people that had said, on the right, that they weren't going to do this. People like Mitt Romney were out here talking about Trump, saying that he got wronged. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people would have predicted happening just a few weeks ago. John, I want to ask you on these numbers, diving in a little more, like what is it $70 million in just, 48 hours or ish, whatever the number was. What is that like in the day of a presidential fundraiser? Like, is this what is a typical amount? What is something that is usual for a presidential campaign? How much out of the norm is this number? I'm assuming it is, judging by the way it's being touted, but what's a typical number?
Well, I'll tell you. So Biden, just looking at Biden and the Democrats' numbers for April, they raised $51 million in the entire month of April. Wow. They had raised They had raised $76 million in the previous month in March, just after the State of the Union. So again, there's that bump after the State of the Union. The president got a big bump in terms of fundraising, and then it dropped back significantly. Now, certainly, if these numbers that the RNC and the Trump campaign are touting are real, and there's no reason to believe that they're not, because it's all the paperwork has to be filed, it certainly is an enormous boon. The president has had more cash on hand than Donald Trump, significantly more cash on hand up to this point. So this may be a matter of the Trump campaign kind of catching up to where the president and the Biden campaign was. But again, it's all going to be, how do they use this money? And is there anyone even persuadable with all of this money that's going around? I mean, it just feels like these camps are so entrenched that we can look at these campaign fundraising totals and you wonder, these guys have no issue. There's no trouble with them getting their message out. So what is the campaign money used for? And I kind of poo-poo a little bit with these two particular guys who are so well known. There's no narrative that they really need to try and sell at this point. How much the campaign funding is actually going to matter.
Yeah. And look, I just anecdotal, I received my first Biden versus Trump flyer in the mail over the weekend. And so that was interesting to see. I get a lot of the local ones, but I hadn't, it's usually a little bit closer to Election Day where I start getting the main ones. But yeah, that is interesting. I mean, like you guys have been saying, I mean, that enthusiasm is going to be key. And, we'll see if it continues, but we've got this appeal coming up, guys. And of course, we know at this point, Team Trump is going to appeal. They've been saying this. And they're saying that, Judge Merchan should have recused himself, citing conflict of interest in that he had donated to the Biden campaign, and saying now he's in the, he was in the judgment seat on basically Biden's political opponent, the guy he donated to. When can we expect to see this appeal? Do we have a sense as to when this thing is going to come down? Obviously, it's got to be before the sentencing there on July 11th.
Actually, my understanding is that the appeal clock starts running when the sentence is handed down. So,
when it's down, okay.
Yeah, so July 11th.
30 days. Okay, yeah. All right.
30 days after July 11th. So
gotcha.
That's the time frame. He'll have 30 days. And there'll be quite a few avenues here. Yes, the recusal of Judge Merchan. I mean, look, the guy, once again, let's stick with the facts, okay? Truth matters. We talk about it all the time at CBN, all right? He did donate to Joe Biden's presidential campaign in 2020. It wasn't much money at all, not much at all, but he did. He donated. He also donated to an organization called StopTrump.org. Look, I mean, to me, and I'm a layman here, I don't even play a constitutional attorney on television, but to me, this seems like a bit of a no-brainer. Like, why in the world at that point wouldn't you recuse yourself? Which, of course, the answer by the Trump folks will say, well, of course we know the answer because he, quote, had it in for Trump. Well, we don't know that for sure. But that type of evidence, when you're donating to a presidential campaign of your main political opponent, says something. Let's also remember that out of 24 judges that could have gotten this case, he got this case. Remember, he also got the Steve Bannon case. He also got the Alan Weisselberg case as well. He got 3 MAGA cases. The chance, that's like, what do they say, rolling I don't know, there's a Vegas term for it. But the point is that is very, very difficult to do, that it's just happenstance that he gets all 3 of these cases. But look, set all of that aside, you also have the issue of the fact that the judge would not allow Brad Smith, a clear FEC expert that the defense wanted to call, that would have refuted some of these federal election campaign issues. He wasn't allowed to be called at all. I mean, that is also potential grounds for appeal. We haven't even gotten to the jury instructions yet, where he basically said, don't worry about the underlying crime here in section 17-152, where you need to show an underlying crime. He said, you don't worry about being unanimous on that part of it. So listen, there's 3 or 4 more avenues that I haven't gotten to. The point is there's plenty of stuff here. I think the real question to look for here on appeals is, not only will this go through the New York State Appellate Division and into the potential New York Supreme Court, but what about the U.S. Supreme Court? And I think that's going to be interesting. My sense of it, talking to some folks in the Trump campaign, that indeed that's exactly what they're going to try to do, get the U.S. Supreme Court to take this case, because they're going to say it was federal election interference, because this case should never have been brought in the first place, especially during an election year.
Yeah, and I did see one of Trump's legal team members talking in an interview about how they are prepared, and saying if need be, we will take this thing all the way up to the Supreme Court. John, if you don't have anything else to add on the appeals situation, on what else we could see there, I was going to move on over to what we're seeing in Capitol Hill. So I'll leave it up to you.
No,
hey,
I think.
Let me
go.
Can I just quickly say something about the donor stuff, because we were on that? I just want to wrap that up real quick. What's important is about 1/3 of those donations that came in after the Trump verdict were from new donors, folks that have never given to Trump before. That's important to point out. But I just, and also to be clear, a lot of that money, even though we say it's for Donald Trump's campaign, okay, yeah, ... with an asterisk, a lot of that RNC money will also be used for down ballot races, which will be important in the House and the Senate.
All right, good note there, John, on the appeal, or we want to move on to Capitol Hill?
I mean, I'll just say this about the appeal. I think it certainly sounds as if there are appeals to be made. I think it's unlikely that they get an overturning of the conviction on appeal. That doesn't happen very often. But I'm not a legal expert. I think you want to I want some lawyers on to dive into that any further. But I would be surprised if it actually gets overturned on appeal, even though there may be some grounds to have the appeal.
All right, yeah, we'll certainly look into that more, and we will get somebody with a legal mind on here as we get closer to that appeal, because once we see more of the arguments being made, we'll have an idea of potentially how this thing is going to go. So stay tuned for that in the coming weeks. But on Capitol Hill, John, Mike Lee promised to kind of take some action here You know, you get the sense that a lot of the GOP here is like, okay, the kid gloves are off now. That you guys went, in their minds, they're saying you guys went and did this. They feel it's partisan. And so you're seeing now they're going to have a response here. So what can we expect to see on Capitol Hill?
Well, hard as it is to believe, Dan, Congress may actually get a little more dysfunctional and move a little slower here during the course of the summer, which it didn't really seem possible that could take place. But Mike Lee and other Trump-aligned Republicans in the Senate say they are going to slow everything down. So some of the different nominations that come across as voice votes, which means you don't need to have a roll call, they're not going to allow that to happen. So any nomination, anything Chuck Schumer wants to get done that would ordinarily have been done by a voice vote to expedite things, they say that they're going to throw some peanut butter into the works on that. And then you're seeing on the House side, Republicans, especially on the Judiciary and on the Oversight Committees, are going to start calling people forward for hearings. So we're already seeing that DA Alvin Bragg is going to be called before the House Judiciary Committee next Thursday to take a look at what the Republicans say is the weaponization of the federal government and their efforts to fight back what a lot of what David has been talking about, some of the what was the motivation behind Alvin Bragg in bringing these charges? Was it justified in bringing these charges? And they're going to bring him, and there's going to be tough questioning of him, and they want to make sure that their voters know, that the Trump voters know, that Republicans and independents know that if you are one of those people who believe that the Biden administration is using the Justice Department to weaponize the federal government, that they're going to be trying to look into that, and they're going to be spending a lot of time on that here while Congress remains in session before they go away on their summer break. And of course, the Democrats will fight back on that. They'll of course look and say this was particularly with the New York case, these were state officials. This was a state district attorney. The President Biden and the White House has no oversight. They have no influence on what New York State does. I know Adam Schiff on one of the Sunday shows says if Donald Trump is unhappy with the fact that his trial took place in New York, then he shouldn't have done the crimes in New York. Of course, there's arguments as to whether, the underlying crimes and whether a felony was actually committed, and were these charges ever brought against a president before? Of course not, with these kinds of business fraud claims. So all of this is going to be in play in these House hearings, and I get the idea that Alvin Bragg will not be the last person as part of all of this to get a subpoena to be called before a House congressional committee.
Well, let me just say there's a name to remember, Matthew Colangelo. He will be called in front of the House committee, Jim Jordan putting that together. Matthew Colangelo, number 3 in charge at the DOJ. That's the Merrick Garland. That's right, Attorney General Merrick Garland, number 3 at the DOJ. Where was he during the Trump trial? Oh, he gave the opening arguments for Alvin Bragg in New York. He moved from the number 3 position. Now, guys, the number 3 position at the DOJ, you work your butt off to get to that position, to take a job in the New York DA's office, that's called a demotion, to then argue this case against Donald Trump. Jim Jordan and others want to see the records. They want to see the transmissions, the communications between the DOJ and Alvin Bragg's office. That is a legitimate inquiry. So this idea that there was no coordination between Biden's DOJ and Alvin Bragg, my answer to that is, you know what? How about we ask a few questions and go do some due diligence, and let's figure it out before either side jumps to any conclusion to say there was no coordinated effort. We don't know the answer until we know the answer. So I think that's very important. And one last thing I'll say real quick on Capitol Hill, and this is the kind of the historical perspective. Look, I've been around for a while, John. I know you have too, Dan. Of course, you as well. Remember back in 2013, all right, this reminds me of the whole payback situation. In 2013, Harry Reid and the Democrats, you know what I'm going to say regarding judges, they invoked the filibuster, right? The nuclear option, as we like to call it. They invoked the filibuster on appellate court judges to say, you know what, forget 60 votes anymore in the Senate. We just need 50. And we're going to put all these appellate court judges through. And Mitch McConnell at the time told Harry Reid, don't you dare. You're going to come back to rue the day that you change those filibuster rules, because when we have control of the majority, we're going to change the filibuster rules on U.S. Supreme Court nominees. Well, hello, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Neil Gorsuch. The point is that it is payback time again. We are seeing Republicans, as you mentioned with Mike Lee, they're going to try to do that, gum up the works in the Senate. But beyond all of that, my biggest concern is that what happened here, there's a view in Republican circles that the Democrats were playing politics with the justice system. So what's going to happen? You're going to see Republicans play politics with the justice system when Biden / whoever it is out of office in a few years, or whoever their Democrat pick of the day is, they're going to go after him. And we're in a tit for tat payback situation that is not good for America. It's not good for the justice system.
Yeah, it's, I mean, making that connection, that seems to be the sticking point that I've seen on a few of the interviews where Trump's legal team has been out there and they mention it. George Stephanopoulos, a former Democratic operative in the Clinton administration, I believe. And seeing him navigate these interviews was interesting to me because he immediately jumped on that point when he brought up Colangelo and he said, hey, he was standing there. He was there and he said, you don't have any evidence of connection. You don't have any evidence of a connection. And so he immediately went to that. And at this point, correct. I mean, there's not, other than where there's smoke, there's fire, kind of as you were bringing up there. So I think we can expect to see the Republicans digging into that. And I think that's something to watch out for, to see if anything comes of that and to see if they're able to get any information on that as far as communications, because that is, as you guys were saying, that is what the Biden administration is essentially saying. Like, what? This is all at a state level. We had nothing to do with us over here. We're just minding our own business. And people aren't buying that, but you got to prove it. So if you're going to say it, got to find the evidence. So, all right, guys, let's wrap up here looking at the Biden campaign, not the administration, but the Biden campaign. How are they messaging all of this right now? What are they doing out of the campaign trail, if anything, at this point, and what can we expect to see from them in the coming days?
Well,
John,
I think, the Biden campaign is essentially telling their voters this, maybe there was a political victory here, but that the only way you're going to keep Donald Trump out of the White House is to vote him out of office in November. And not to look at the conviction in New York as that being an avenue for him to not be the next to be reelected, to get a second term in office. So they are trying to make sure that everybody understands. And a lot of the messaging has been, listen, don't let this, don't have a false sense of security over this guilty verdict. We still need people to come out and vote. They still need to turn out the vote. And so we're seeing the Biden campaign. Last week they went to Girard College in Philadelphia to try and to launch a new initiative to try and bring along more African-American voters. The president right now in the polling has lost about 20% of his support from African-American voters. Still a large lead over Trump in that particular demographic, but he needs a much larger share, like he got in 2020, in order to carry some of these different areas that he did so well in last time. So you're going to see a real push for that. You're going to see a continued push for the abortion issue, and then this week he's going to continue to use, and one of the powers that an incumbent president has is you have the presidency. You have the seal of the presidency, and he's going to go to France this week as part of the 80th anniversary of the D-Day celebration, and he's going to be visiting President Macron for a state dinner in France, and using that prestige as the sitting president of the United States to help kind of keep the focus on him. But we see with President Biden that he's not on the campaign trail as much as other incumbent presidents have been. Certainly not Barack Obama, certainly not Bill Clinton, any of the President Bushes from before. It's certainly a more low-key campaign that President Biden is running right now, and I think for some pretty obvious reasons. So that remains to be seen whether or not he can just kind of crack through this ceiling that he seems to have hit with his numbers, both polling and approval rating wise. He's got two things that he really can't do anything about: the inflation numbers and his age, and he's got to try and convince voters to vote for him despite those two things.
Well,
yeah. I'll just say on the economy front, guys, that the flyer that I mentioned that I got, that was one of the things that it was kind of an attack on Biden, was the one I received, and it said it quoted Biden talking up the economy. So obviously the GOP, this is something they think they have an inroad on, obviously. So go ahead, David.
I was going to say there's two phrases that you're going to hear a lot from the Biden campaign. the words threat to democracy. You'll hear that time and time again, and you'll hear the words convicted felon. That's their hope. They have gotten the convicted felon language. They're able to use that now. That was the goal all along. They wanted to make sure that they could have a convicted felon to run against. And if you think about it, you know, typically in presidential campaigns, you want to have an uplifting message, right? You know, hope and change, and Bill Clinton with, you know, I feel your pain and all that type of stuff. But what is Biden's compelling, uplifting message at this point? I mean, hey, vote for me. At least I'm not a convicted felon. So, I mean, if you think about it, you know, that's kind of what they're saying. Threat to democracy, convicted felon. Listen, you might not, maybe I'm not the best guy in the world. I'm a little old. I'll admit I'm a little old, but I'm not Trump. Guys, I got to tell you, I've been around politics for a long time. That ain't going to cut it. It ain't going to cut it. People want an uplifting message. They want a positive message. And I think the biggest thing for going in President Trump's favor right now is that he's been a president. And because of that, people are able to juxtaposition both of them together. What it was like under Biden, what it's been like under Trump. And I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, animal, vegetable, or mineral. The truth of the matter is, I think people, voters, are seeing the difference. There is a big difference between what I'm talking about from a policy standpoint, not a political standpoint, not from a mean tweet standpoint, not from a guy called Orange Man Bad. I don't mean your dislike of Donald Trump. I'm talking about, was life better under Trump or Biden? I think voters ultimately are going to be faced with that decision. And when they're faced with that decision, that's not good news for Joe Biden. Once again, don't take my word for it. Just look at the polls. It plays out every single day.
And Dan, if I can just jump in with one thing that David said there, and I agree, but I will say that neither candidate is giving an uplifting message right now. Both candidates are demonizing the other. On the Trump side, you hear nothing but America is failing. We're a banana republic state. It's never been worse. And on the Biden side, you have the worries of Trump is a dictator. Well, he's a despot, and I think whichever candidate can get a positive message out there that sticks will actually make an impact. But right now, neither guy is painting a rosy picture of America here in this campaign.
Well, the difference is, John, is that Trump is trying to take it back to a rosier version of what he believes make America great again and all of that. But beyond all of that, there's a book by Drew Weston at Emory University called The Politics of Emoting. You know, people don't vote with their brain, they vote with their heart. They vote with their emotions. They vote with a connection. Donald Trump seems to have that connection right now with voters to say, you know what, when he says things are going to hell in a handbasket, people look at him and go, you know what, I can relate to that. Emotionally, I can see what you're saying based on X, Y, and Z analytical data. And that, I think, is the caveat and the difference as to, he might not have the, quote, most uplifting message in the world, but he has a very relatable message from an emotional standpoint, whereas Biden's message is a PowerPoint presentation and say the economy is just going gangbusters. Look, when you go to the grocery store and you try to buy a house or try to buy a car, people are not thinking of the PDF presentation by Joe Biden. Yeah. There's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, good points. I mean, and to your point too, John, I mean, I think if Trump can take the message that, like you were just saying, he's saying now, and then pair it, as you were kind of suggesting, with, hey, remember when I was in office and we had this and this? I mean, you could potentially spin that into a very, positive looking view. Like, hey, like things are rough right now, but look at what we had, and we can bring that back. And Biden's going to have to find his footing on that as well, because if it's all negative Nelly on every side, then yeah, I think you're right there. It's a tougher sell. It's a tougher sell. And Biden does have his work cut out for him, spinning a positive message, as you were saying, David, with this economy, when everyone's got to pay for groceries and pay for gas. Like, you just cannot ignore that at this point. But hey guys, we're gonna call it a show right here on this first episode of the campaign. We've got many more of these to come here between now and November, but it'll be fun catching you guys up on everything that's going on throughout the campaign trail. It's always going to be a busy week. There's always going to be, it's just going to keep heating up, as we were saying. So appreciate you guys spending the time here and getting everybody informed as to what's going on.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, guys.